Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The regular meeting of the Grosse Ile Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get into the agenda, we have a change up here at the Planning Commission. We now have a new board representative, Kyle DeBoucher. Kyle?
Hello.
Introduce yourself, please.
Sure. There's a long story and a short story. I guess the short version is my family's been here on the island for quite some time, as I know some others here as well. But yeah, more recently, about 8 years ago, I moved back to help out my aunt and niece with Westcroft, and kind of moved that over to my cousin Erica, who now runs Westcroft. And a few months ago, put my hat in the ring for trustee. Honestly, did not expect to get it, but I did. I got it. I'm very happy to be here and excited for it. A big part of what I've tried to do since I've been here, honestly, is just reach out to and talk to as many people as are willing, which happens to me not too many. I think I've heard so far that generally the people start to reach out to you when you've done something wrong. So thankfully that hasn't happened yet. But still, the invitation is out there. I don't know if there's space in tonight's meeting. I know that Ross is going to be talking about some exciting things. But yeah, I'll probably be reaching out to all of you. There's some things I've kind of been looking at and bouncing off of people, and I might do that with all of you as well. So seriously, happy to reach out and meet one-to-one with anyone at any time and learn. That's really a lot of what I'm trying to do. Yeah, and I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thank you, Kyle. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
On that note, our prior board representative, or liaison, was Uta O'Connor. Uta was with us for many, many years, and she made some really strong contributions to our planning commission thought processes and moving through changes that we needed to make and making correct decisions. And I certainly appreciate it, and I know I would like to have a motion recognizing Uta for her contributions to the Planning Commission and wishing her the best. May I have a motion, please?
Second.
I say so moved.
Motion from Eric, second from Kyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Uta. We'll now move to the additions, deletions to the agenda. You received a revised agenda, I believe, on Friday. That's the one we're operating off of. It includes the presentation by Ross Quero of the Redevelopment Ready Community Program. So that's what we're operating off of. Everybody clear on that? If that's the case, I would entertain a motion to accept the agenda as submitted. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support.
Support from Angela.
Support from Angela. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Next is the review and approval of minutes from June 6th. Were there any comments on those minutes? Dan?
No.
Brian? Yeah. John? No. Jim?
All set.
Eric? Angela?
Nope.
No, sir.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion, please, to approve as submitted. Motion from John. Is there
Second.
Support from Brian? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you for the good minutes. Next is public comment, an opportunity for citizens to speak with the commission about items not on the agenda. Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the first item of business, which is a lot reconfiguration. The applicant is Chris Hancock, 29874 Bayview, Grosse Ile. The lot in question legally is Supervisor's Plat number 48, lot number 411, and Supervisor's Plat number 254, lot 294. The common description, it's two vacant lots along East River at the bend before East River crosses the bridge to Hickory Island. The background on this, there are two lots at that location. There's Lot A, actually on East River, which is 0.8 acres, and it's zoned R1B. That's, and then there's the second lot, Lot B, which is actually on the water, and it's 4.5 acres, and it's zoned R1A. Lot R1A does not have the required 40 foot of road frontage as required under the ordinance to be buildable. The proposal is to reconfigure the line between lots A and B such that B frontage is increased to the 40-foot minimum requirement. The ordinances that are applicable: Article 3, single-family residential, and Article 19, general provisions, specifically Section 19.21, entitled Lot Splits and Consolidations. The process for this review is two-step. First, the Planning Commission conducts the review and makes a recommendation. That then goes to the Township Board for their approval. Tonight, we're at step 1, and I do anticipate the Planning Commission will vote on this evening. Brian?
On. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me through the mics? Good. Got green light, so we should be good. Thank you, John, for the introduction. Again, some of this will be a bit redundant, but we are dealing with 2 parcels on East River at the Bend. It's across the street from Groseal Yacht Club. If that helped anybody to identify the site better, I use that as a bit of a demarcation point. So there's a parcel that sits here right at with the frontage and at the Bend, and then there's sort of almost a flag-shaped parcel that sits in here with its frontage, and it actually then comes all the way back and occupies all of this open space between these 2 homes here, all the way to the shoreline, and actually beyond for the technical boundary. So, site and surrounding area zoned R1B, single-family zoning. And the request again before you is what we call a lot reconfiguration. Under your ordinance, it's still a land division, but it's a simultaneous division combination. So if you think of it in terms of simply shifting of a common lot line, that's the easiest way to describe what is being proposed here. So I'll show you in a better diagram momentarily, but in essence, there's a rear lot line of the front parcel that is the side lot line of the bigger parcel, and the applicant is looking to simply adjust that by 20 feet. So here is a little bit better look. The formatting on this is a little odd, so I apologize, but I did highlight here, so parcel A existing, this is existing conditions. So outlined in sort of this purplish is parcel A, 0.8 acre parcel. It is a fully compliant parcel in terms of zoning. And then parcel B, as I mentioned, sort of this somewhat unusually shaped lot with a little bit of frontage, and then widens out significantly to the point where there's actually almost 4.5 acres of land currently. So very large lot, just very limited frontage. So the issue with parcel B currently is that it is non-conforming for its road frontage. So it does have the area, it does have plenty of width. The issue is strictly in its amount of road frontage. So what the petitioner is seeking to do, and I didn't color code this one, I apologize, but if you can follow my cursor here, you'll see the line difference here. So simply looking to take, this is the existing rear lot line of parcel A, looking to slide that over 20 feet such that parcel B then has the required lineal feet of frontage along East River. They do gain a little bit of lot width up in this area, but again, it's a otherwise compliant lot. And if this ultimately is granted, it would result in 2 fully compliant zoning lots. So it's one of the goals of your non-conforming chapters to eliminate non-conformities. And momentarily, I will tell you that that's also one of the review criteria for land divisions. So as we've already outlined, we're adjusting rear lot line / side lot line by 20 feet. As John mentioned at the outset, we're dealing with Article 3 and then also Section 19.21, which deals specifically with land divisions. Procedurally, Planning Commission reviews the case, and at such time as you're ready, puts forth a recommendation. Township Board does have final review and approval authority. So with all that out of the way, I will run through a quick summary of my review letter. The right side of the slide, these are the review criteria from Section 19.21. So we start with lot area. Both parcels currently meet and will continue to meet minimum lot area. Building envelope, Both parcels have ample building envelopes. There's no issue of creating a lot that wouldn't be buildable for some reason, either site constraints or odd layout, whatever the case might be. Buildable area, there really aren't any existing limitations on parcel A. Parcel B does have an area of wetland, but that is all the way to the west along the shoreline. Did include as part of the submittal package an excerpt from the township's wetlands inventory, and that was marked up that you could see the amount of wetlands that are essentially on the west side of the portion. But again, as I mentioned, it's kind of from the shoreline up, won't affect buildability of a 4.5 acre lot, so we don't have any issues there. Minimum frontage, so the ordinance does establish 60 foot is the minimum frontage for a developable parcel. Parcel B, as a result of this request, would have that minimum frontage. Parcel A currently has and would continue to have. Shape of parcels, so this is one where when we create new parcels by the land division process, we want to make sure that we're keeping things relatively in order. We're looking for rectangular shaped lots. In this case, we're not creating a new buildable parcel, we're just adjusting a lot line. So while both parcels technically are a little bit unusual in terms of their shape, in my opinion, I don't foresee any issues with it. One, due to their size, there's ample area. We're not trying to cram too much onto a small lot. And two, it just, again, these envelopes are really large, and it's just not going to create an issue. This parcel B, that configuration, that's probably not a lot we'd want to create today if it was newly created, but because we're just adjusting that common lot line, I don't have any issues with it. We're not taking an existing condition, we're not making anything worse, maybe is a shorter way to have said that. Depth to width, so parcel A does meet the depth to width, so there's a common factor. It's developed, it actually started with state law. 4:1 is a common depth to width ratio. So again, you don't want super narrow, super deep lots. That creates issues typically with setbacks. Parcel A does currently meet that and will continue to meet that. Parcel B is a little out of whack with the depth to width ratio, but that's only because of its, again, somewhat unusual shape, and it's incredibly, well, at least in relation to other properties and other R1B properties in particular, it's really large size. So under your ordinance, any lots that are more than 1 acre are not subject to the 4:1 depth to width ratio. So we don't have to worry about that for parcel B. Easements, there really aren't any issues with any easements. There are utilities along the road frontage or within the East River right-of-way, so we don't have to have any easements for utilities. There is, however, a shared driveway easement, if you can follow the cursor. So these parcels, and they all share kind of this sort of unusual shape in here. They kind of mirror, where there's 2 in the middle and there's a 4th down here that kind of mirrors our parcel B here with this sort of somewhat odd shape. When the other 3 were originally developed, or whoever owned these at some point way back in time, they did put a shared driveway easement so that with these narrow frontages, we didn't wind up with 4 driveways that were all kind of coming to a point, creating a bit of a traffic nightmare, really a safety issue. So, and I believe, and I will look to confirm with the petitioner, but I believe our parcel B here, I believe under deed restriction is subject to using that driveway easement. That is correct. So whatever ends up development-wise here, assuming this gets approved ultimately by the board, this parcel would be utilizing that shared driveway easement as well, so that we have a little bit better access management along this strange, this little bend of East River here. So I think that's an important thing to note. Elimination of non-conformity. So this is really one of the big parts of this request is we have 1 conforming parcel, we have 1 non-conforming parcel. As a result of the request, we have 2 conforming parcels. So the intent of Article 18, which is your non-conforming chapter, is always to eliminate non-conformity when we have the opportunity to do so. Non-conformities are allowed to remain in place, but it's not our goal to sort of keep them into existence longer than we need to. So this is a situation where I really view this as, I hate to say it, but a win-win, where we're eliminating a non-conforming parcel and petitioners gaining the ability to construct a home on this lot. And then the last one is really tied to a special assessment district. So the goal here is, if there was a district over that a parcel was subject to, and if it were frontage based, like let's say they had a special assessment for a road improvement, and it was based on the widths or the frontage of the roads, and that changed, that could have an impact. In this case, there's no impact of any special assessment district. There wasn't one to speak of, so we have zero effect there. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. I know I kind of rushed through that, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to do my best to help you through it. And if you do not, or as we move forward, the petitioner is here this evening as well. So I'm sure they would like to introduce themselves at some point, and if you have questions more specific to them, they'll be happy to take those too.
Let's see. Anybody have any questions or comments for Brian before we go to the applicant?
I do.
Eric.
One question, and I don't know the specific ordinance, but isn't there it's either state of Michigan lot division and reconfiguration? You can only divide and reconfigure a lot X number of times.
So it's a land division requirement, and it's the number of times you can split a parcel for the creation of new parcels. So this reconfiguration actually wouldn't be burdened.
It's not, okay, so
wouldn't be burdened
there's
by
nothing that the landowner has to worry about making this and then not be able to make any more.
No, that's a great point, though. I probably, it really, when we're just shifting a lot line, that standard does not come into play. There's a base standard of, you get 4 or 5 splits for the first 10 acres or something like that, and that is in the state law under the Land Division Act, but we don't have any impact of that in this particular case.
Thanks.
Additional questions?
One question, which is more of a
Brian.
clarification. Thank you. So if I understand it correctly, there are 3 existing driveways on the adjoining properties that all, the driveways all conjoin together and to make one actual access point onto East River, and that the parcel B would be included within that?
Yeah, so I don't, the exact configuration, I think the other 3 do converge into one. Is that correct? But yeah, they will be subject to use of that easement as well. It is an actual deed restriction that's on this parcel. And then maybe perhaps when we're done, we'll let the petitioner give you a little more detail on that.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, Mr. Hancock. Please give us your full name and address for the record.
Chris
And welcome to the
Hancock.
Planning Commission.
Thank you. Well, hi, nice to meet y'all. My name's Chris Hancock, 29874 Bayview, Crozio. For the moment, and I'll be going.
So it's been pretty stressful, let me tell you. So let me answer the question Brian brought up real quick, and I think I might have misunderstood or might change from what you said, Brian. But yes, to answer your question, there is a house.
Okay, excuse me a minute. We need to have a microphone. It's not working.
I'm sorry, maybe I was too far away. Is that better?
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, much better.
Sorry about that, folks. So to answer Brian's question, currently, my neighbor to the south, which occupies this space here, has his own driveway that comes in and meanders through here to his home. These 2 houses here and the lot here come into a driveway which is shared, and one goes off this way and the other one splits off of that way. I do not intend on using my neighbor's driveway, although I think I have the right to. I couldn't possibly go up to him and say, after 20 years of using his own driveway and it looking like his, that I'm going to bust into town and say, this is ours now. So my hope is that I get to put a driveway right here along this line and enter in this way, if that makes any sense.
Brian, who makes that determination?
Well, we'll have to take a look at that restriction again, but it will have the required amount of frontage now. So ultimately, it could just be as easy as it'd be a Wayne County driveway permit. So Wayne County would evaluate the spacing of the driveways, make sure that there aren't site distance issues where the new driveway is going in. But I guess I'd want to, I thought based on one of our preliminary meetings, I thought it was deed restricted that you had to use that shared driveway easement.
The way it was confronted to me, I think Mike Perry's the one that developed this lot originally, and he explained it to me because there was this frontage issue is why he created this, to not have to go through this process. So, but the way the building department's determining it is, doesn't matter. This easement makes no difference. It's a non-conforming lot. The only way to make it conforming is to come see you folks and make it conforming. That's the way it's been explained to me. So the easement was supposed to circumvent the need for this, but apparently it didn't.
Okay, any additional thoughts or questions for the applicant? Anything else you'd like to share?
Really, I'm looking forward to an approval here because it's been pretty stressful. As I said, I sold my house in anticipation of an agreeable thing. I hope if there's anything that anybody thinks that there's a problem with, I'd like to hear it. And
Well, we're going to go around the table and find out. We're going to start down at the far end there. Mr. Rathel. Oh, Mr. Boggs, sorry.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward to me, and I really don't see any negatives of making this change to the property. So I'm in support of it and don't have any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Rathel.
I have no concerns.
Pollock.
I think it's straightforward. I don't have any concerns for the planning commission. Again, if there is something in the deed as far as a restriction, I encourage you to check that out, so that way you don't have any surprises, but I don't think there's anything for us to, to stop as far as this. I think it makes sense, and it's going to make a conforming lot, so thank you, and I hope your process goes smoothly.
Mr. Davis.
No further questions. Appreciate it.
Mr. Ranka.
Yep, no questions.
I just have one question in terms of, so we're looking at parcel B, and I understand that's the one in question, but parcel A, it makes sense to me what you said about wanting the driveway to be your own and having to, and being able to design that. Is there any thought on how you would develop B? Would that be shared, or is that complete, or A, I'm sorry, is that completely?
no, I wouldn't prefer to have a shared lot either. I currently have a shared lot, and it's terrible. I would rather, I don't know if you guys have been down there lately, but they cut a road in on the back side of this lot already, and that's kind of where the house that I have in mind for that property, just to give you a little bit of a insight of what I'm hoping to do there. I'm hoping by doing this whole process that this sharp curve, which has been, I've lived here for 20 years, terribly unsafe, because all the vegetation that grows there, you can't see this blind corner coming around here. And when I develop this lot, all that's going to get mowed down, and it'll be like regular grass, and I think it's going to look fantastic. And it's going to have a home on it. I hope to put a wraparound porch here, something that's going to overlook the harbor. I think it's going to be a very desirable spot. And my hope would be to bring the driveway in on the west line to a garage that would be behind the house, so that from the front you see a wraparound porch type situation or something like that, something really appealing. And it will most likely be a ranch, because there's a shortage of ranches on this house, or on this island.
I live not far from here, so I'm well aware, and that was kind of the crux of my question, I guess, is that bend there. So, but otherwise, I have no questions.
Thank you, Angela. Kyle.
Just make sure I understood. So you don't plan to develop parcel A, is what you're saying, or no?
No, I do.
Oh, you do? Okay, yes. Okay, got it. Yeah, no questions. I'm sorry that it's been stressful for you. I hope that we're able to make it less stressful for you tonight. I'll just say, I don't know if anyone's interested, but for me, the history of why a lot of these lots are made this way, they're like old ribbon farms. So everyone liked the access to the water, and before there was running water, you could get water up through that way. So I don't know, that's just interesting to me, but I'm happy. I just think you gave us a great proposal. It's a very elegant solution. It's just one line change. So I'm grateful for the work you've done here and making this easy for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Jay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. I have no questions or concerns.
Okay. On that note, I entertain a motion, please, regarding the lot split reconfiguration 381.
So moved.
That's a motion to approve from Brian. Is there support?
Support.
Support from
Kyle.
Kyle. Call a question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Very good.
Forward to a good night's sleep. Thanks.
Okay, moving on. We have a public hearing on a proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance, specifically Article 1911, waterfront structures and uses. A little background on this: the Planning Commission has been looking into the issue of waterfront structures. We generally concluded that the current ordinance standards on internal waterways are too stringent. What this causes is that the homeowners end up putting up structures without permits in a somewhat haphazard fashion. And we look to see what we could do from an ordinance perspective to address this. We started our review on the Thoroughfare Canal, since it stretches the full length of the island, almost, and is a single zoning district, R1B, making it very easy for us to define and very easy way for us to get started into this. The Planning Commission may consider other internal canals areas should this change be accepted by the Planning Commission and ultimately the Township Board. At the last meeting, we discussed the changes in quite a bit of detail and directed Brian to bring it back to us with the thoughts that the Planning Commission had. So we're at the point now where this is actually part of the formal review. So as far as the ordinances are concerned, to amend an ordinance, we look at Article 25, zoning ordinance amendments. The process is two-step. The Planning Commission holds a public hearing, and we issue a recommendation to the Township Board. The Township Board then takes it up and reviews and approves it. Tonight we're at step one. We will have a public hearing, and I do expect the Planning Commission to vote on this tonight. So, Brian, you're on again.
All right, give me 1 second. I do have the current draft. So as I think everyone other than Kyle will recall. Sorry to single you out,
I've
Kyle.
actually watched the meeting, though, so I saw the discussion.
So you are up to speed as well. So, yeah, what we're looking at is some minor text changes to section 19.1, which relates to your accessory structures, uses, and buildings. We focused on buildings, and as John mentioned, the scope that we were given, the task that was handed to us was to evaluate the excessive number of detached accessory buildings along the waterway, along Thoroughfare Canal. So that's what we did. John presented you with a lot of research. Subcommittee worked together. We created a draft. We refined that draft, and then we presented that draft at your last meeting. And you recall we were kind of hammering out some changes while we were discussing it. So this current draft, which is version number 3, we did incorporate and I cleaned up a little bit some of the language we had talked about last month. So I'll just kind of walk through this real quickly. So one of the things we did, this was actually a little outside of the scope, but we came about it at the same exact time. We had a ZBA case with a matter of a double fronted lot or a through lot under the terminology of your ordinance. And we had an accessory structure, and we ran into some issues with that. The variance was ultimately granted, but we saw this as an opportunity to kind of clean that particular section up as well. So what we wrote in was an allowance for accessory buildings or structures in what we defined as the secondary front yard, so not the primary road frontage, but the opposite of that, and allowing it with a setback that's equivalent to where a principal building could have been constructed. So in essence, it would be primarily a 40-foot setback if someone wanted to pursue that project moving forward. We felt like the timing was right, and quite frankly, there aren't a lot of these situations on the island, but where we do see them, a number of them already have some form of accessory building or structure in that secondary front yard. So we thought that was a pretty good cleanup item. So the primary focus was down here. So we've created this new row for waterfront lots in R1B zoning that front the Thoroughfare Canal. So as John mentioned, it was very explicit to that. That's what we were asked to look at. That's what we looked at. We went back and forth a little bit on the area to allow. Ultimately, we landed at 120 square feet, which is the same as is allowed for other waterfront yard structures. So we did not stray from that. We're allowing them in either a side yard if your lot is sizable enough to fit it there, or in the waterfront yard, subject to setbacks. So we stuck with the 6-foot side yard. That's consistent throughout your ordinance for accessory buildings and principal buildings. So I think everybody kind of agreed 6 foot was a good number there. And then with the waterfront, again, this was something we did have a lot of dialogue about, not only at the subcommittee level, but also with the full commission. And what we landed on was this requirement. So the standard requirement would be 25 feet from the shoreline. So you do have some precedent in your ordinance already for the natural features setback, which is a 25-foot setback from ordinary high water mark or shoreline or edge of wetland. So that was where the 25-foot came from. But understanding that that might create a little bit of a weird situation if we're in a neighborhood where most of them are a little bit closer to the shoreline, we incorporated this footnote B. So what that says, and I'll go back to the first part of it momentarily, but what we wrote in was basically some administrative discretion. So upon review of a request for a new building, the zoning administrator can reduce that 25-foot setback based on existing conditions. And one of the things that we wrote in here explicitly was the established setback of similar structures. Because I think the idea is if we have 4 or 5 homes in a row and they all have, a 5-foot or 10-foot setback, it seems a little odd to force somebody to build it at 25 foot. So the character of that particular area and the neighboring property is such that we could allow them to build it at the 10-foot line, just like the neighbors have done. So we wrote that discretion in, and because not anytime, but a lot of times when we have administrative discretion, we do like to have the ability, if there's a disagreement in terms of whether or not we feel that standard is met, we want to have a process in place for that, and we don't necessarily want to just make it a denial and then an appeal to ZBA. So the second part of this discretion is if the zoning administrator does not grant it, so if an applicant feels aggrieved, or if we just can't come to terms on it and say, we don't really think you meet that test, we can bring it in front of the planning commission. And then that way we can have a public dialogue with it. And then the neighbors obviously could attend and we could have a bigger discussion about it, as opposed to kind of forcing that discretion where maybe staff isn't comfortable using it, or maybe we don't really feel that that matches the character of that particular area. So we have that process built into this as well. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, I think it makes sense. I think it's a pretty reasonable approach. And for the most part, I hope they're clear cut and we don't really ever have to use that. But I think we all know that as time goes on, there's probably a chance one of these ends up in front of you. Every now and again, we get some unique requests that require planning commission attention that otherwise could have been dealt with administratively, but just can't bring it to terms. So, and then the last point, which I kind of jumped over when I got into footnote B, was the other thing we talked about was, again, under the thought of still trying to protect these shoreline views, we capped the building height at 10 feet. So that was something we talked about with commission at the last meeting. Conventionally, you would be allowed a 12-foot detached accessory building. We did bump that down a little bit, given that this is kind of a sensitive area, and wanting to make sure we're not infringing further upon views, because we're allowing something that, granted, while it exists in many locations, it's not allowed under your current ordinance. So we felt like that was a pretty good happy medium of potentially allowing residents to do something that they haven't previously been allowed to do, but also kind of protecting the neighbors and the others in the area. So that's the long and short of it. Happy to take any questions. We can still wordsmith this thing, so if any of you have a suggestion or there's a tweak that you want to make, obviously we can still do that. If we're good with it as is, then we do still have to conduct a public hearing. Once we get through the hearing, if you're good with the language as is, you could put forth the recommendation to Township Board.
Thank you, Brian. Very thorough as usual. Are there any questions for Brian before I go to the public hearing? Jay.
Brian, as I'm looking at it, I'm a little confused by the footnotes. So you've got a footnote B that says such building shall have a maximum height of 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
and then does that continue, does the rest, the second page, that's a continuation
Yep,
of footnote
it's
B?
all footnote
So
B.
All those apply?
Yeah,
And-
if you think that's confusing, I can double it up.
Well, I think it was just that, maybe it was just the fact that it rolled to the second
Yeah,
page.
I can call, because there isn't really, there wasn't a better place to deal with the height, so we were trying to tackle it all in one footnote. But as I'm kind of just sketching up here, I mean, if you wanted me to make footnote B the height limit, and then footnote C the administrative discretion, I could certainly do that if you think that's clearer. Can't get the copyright mark.
John's nodding.
If you think that's clearer, can
think it is.
absolutely do it that way.
The engineer wants it super clear.
Yeah. And,
Imagine that.
And a couple of things, I was not here for the last meeting. I was absent. But, so a couple of the questions. So the maximum height of 10 feet, the measurement of that is that halfway between the top
Pitched
and the
roof,
bottom?
it's to the midpoint.
To the midpoint.
Flat roof, it's to the peak.
Flat roof, it's to the peak. Peak on a flat roof?
Well, to the top.
Sorry. Okay,
Still the peak, it's just all peak.
there you go. Okay,
I think there's, on that note, there is an implicit assumption about the angle of the roof. Is there not?
Not necessarily. It
No,
doesn't
there-
have to be. I mean, we would, so the,
A barn type roof.
yes, so different types of roof structures do have different ways to measure height. For the most part, it's going to be the midpoint of that structure. I was gonna see if I can get your internet to work. I can pull up the ordinance and show you. There's a graphic in your definitions of building height that shows different roof styles. Maybe. Maybe not.
Not. There you go.
There is so again, this is in the definitions, and here we go. So there's this depiction of the different types of roof structures, and then how you get to that measurement of where the actual height is. So we would follow that for any type of structure that we got in. For the most part, they're pretty straightforward. It's not usually, we don't usually see too many, crazy roof lines, but you never know.
Jay, additional questions?
no.
You good?
No, I am, yes.
Any other questions before we go to the public hearing?
Over
Okay.
here, Mr. Chair.
Brian?
So first of all, a comment, I greatly appreciate the added flexibility added into this, this language over here. I know that there's been some good conversations, and I think this is a very welcome change to the zoning ordinance. Related to that, I know that conversations in the past did come up about kayaks and sea kayaks where they might be around like 17 feet or approximately in length. And so there might be concerns about storing something like that. I noticed that as far as the floor area, we just still have that 120 square feet. So just a point of clarification, it sounds like if there was a resident that had a home that had a sea kayak and sort, and he wanted to be able to house that within a structure based on the way this ordinance is set up, he or she would be able to do so.
Yeah, it would be a very odd-shaped building, but yes. I mean, it'd basically be 6 foot wide by 20 feet in length.
Yeah.
If they want to build that, yes. Yeah, we did not. We've talked a couple of different times about putting in a depth to width ratio, and we talked ourselves out of it both times. So there comes a point where we don't want to over-regulate the design, and if it creates, I think the real conclusion that I took from it was when we took the square footage back down to 120 square feet, I think we eliminated some of the fears that we had of potentially like 40-foot-long buildings, something that might really look out of place and occupy a very long portion of someone's side lot line in their waterfront yard. That's when we were talking about allowing structures that were, 300, 400, 500, 600 square feet in area. I think by taking it down to the 120, I think we've pretty much eliminated that, unless somebody wants to build that 6 foot by 20 foot. Which
Gotcha.
theoretically they could do.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then I will formally open the public hearing for this ordinance change. Is there anybody who would like to speak to this topic? Sir. Please give us your name and your address, and we welcome your comments.
Thank you. Phil Kennedy, 28860 Swan Island Drive, Grosse Ile. I listened intently to the meeting on June 6th and pretty much agreed with everything that was stated. The statements that we wanted to avoid ZBA, we wanted to have universal ordinances, we wanted to not be terribly restrictive to the residents and have them overly constrained. And I live on Swan Island Drive, I felt that this was going to be an ordinance that was going to be applicable to internal waterways. I was kind of surprised when I found out after reading the language that was put into the petition that this is Thoroughfare Canal only. I kind of feel like the orphan at the family picnic. Initially, I emailed Chairman Swikert and Brian, and I expressed my concern as to was this going to be applicable to the other waterways. And Brian responded quite promptly and professionally that they felt that the density of the housing or the unapproved structures on Swan Island didn't warrant this type of concern. And I was like a little bit amazed at that and did a little research, preliminary, and sent a second email, and he responded, well, we were just dealing with Thoroughfare Canal, that's what we were hired to do, and that's what we're doing, and that's fine. But I have since looked at two of the other waterways. There are actually three. There's the canal off of Elba, on the west side of Elba, that has similar properties. There's Frenchman's Creek, and then there's Swan Island Canal. And just looking at the data, Swan Island Canal has 15 unauthorized shed constructions, not garages, not other buildings, not docks, what have you, but actual sheds, as John Rathel had pointed out at the last meeting. These are sheds we're talking about. It has 15 out of 48. That's a little over 31%. And Frenchman's Creek has 28 out of 68. 68 houses along Frenchman's Creek. 28 of them have non-conforming structures. The ratio of the structures on the waterfront to those that are set back at least 25 feet or so is much in line with what was presented by your committee. I mean, I think on Swan Island Canal there are 5 out of the 15 that are basically would have been within the 25 feet. I don't know on Frenchman's Creek the exact number, but most of them are storage sheds for lawn equipment and yard equipment. Most of these don't seem to be waterfront associated, so to speak, and so I was very encouraged by the approach that the commission has taken. I'm a little discouraged that we have excluded a significant number of residents that face the same restrictions. And it seems to me like we're going to, as Chairman Swikert pointed out, well, then we could review these later and we could have a second study and a second public hearing and have another line item on our ordinances or what have you. But in the meantime, and there's construction going on in Swan Island Canal. I don't know so much about Frenchman's Creek, but already there's situations that are developing with non-conforming structures, and I totally agree that we want to avoid ordinances that are overly burdensome on the population, and this is one that is. The lots are somewhat narrow, as was stated in the June meeting. Side yards really don't exist that would allow a structure, and you front on a road and you front on a canal. And so I would only encourage, if it's possible, to change the scope of this, maybe. If not, I would encourage expeditious review and consideration of the other 3 waterways that this problem definitely exists for. As far as Elba, I couldn't give you an estimate of how many structures are there. I did not go by boat around Elba and make a count. There are some you can see from the satellite images, but when you look at it, I mean, on Thoroughfare, Chairman Swikert mentioned they felt there were 40 thereabouts out of, and there's 190 thereabout houses on Thoroughfare Canal. That's only 20%. Even if you up that to 60, say you miscounted a lot, and there were really 60 there, you're just up at 30%, which is basically where these other waterways are and exceed. I mean, Frenchman's Creek's 41% of non-conforming structures on the waterfront yard. So I applaud the work. I totally agree that the 10-foot height. I agree with the setback, the 25-foot setback. I agree with the building department's discretion. I have a lot of confidence in our building department, and I agree that with everything that was done, I just disagree with the scope of it, and that's all I wanted to bring forth to the commission. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I think it's fair to say that you've presented a solid case for us to continue this particular ordinance type revision as a phase 2. As clearly as your numbers suggest, it's at least comparable to what we see on Thoroughfare Canal, if not substantially worse in some cases. And assuming that the board agrees with this approach, I think we'll have a good foundation to be able to now look at the other 3 specific areas that you highlighted. Brian, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So it will not be forgotten, but we absolutely are not going to hold this one up in order to continue a study. This has to go through. We have to get it in place. The board has to have their say that this is acceptable to them before we do anything else.
That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Seeing no other people in the audience, except Ross, I don't think he has any comments. I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion from Jay, support? Support. Support from Kyle. Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried, public hearing is closed. Bring it back to the table for final discussion. Jay, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I guess it's appropriate for me to disclose again that I do live on the Thoroughfare Canal, would be affected by this, and as well as my neighbors. Having said that, I don't think I need to abstain from involvement in the discussion or the voting. But I think a lot of good work has been done here, both in prep and in the meeting in June, as well as the drafting since then. And I'm in full agreement with the changes, as well as assuming that the township board is in approval with the scope, in expanding the scope of this one beyond for a further study to make sure that all of the same things apply. And if that's true, then revisiting it and expanding the scope of the new zoning section, or a new one that might incorporate some changes for whatever reason. But I'm in favor of this at this point, and with no questions or comments.
Thank you, Jay. Jim?
No, I was on a subcommittee. I've had a lot of time to think about this one. I think makes a lot of sense to me. So no further comments.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, no, we've talked about this for quite a while now. I'm ready to move forward. I think we've got really good compromises here, really good solutions, and it should help ease the burden on a lot of residents. I do also agree with Mr. Kennedy's comments that there are actually not 3, there's actually 4 other areas where this would impact. The other one is down on Meridian by BSF Canal.
Yes.
Not quite as many properties down there, but there is a 4th, and I do agree that this likely would fit pretty well in all of those, but I think we need to look at it for all 4.
Angela?
No, I think this has been a good learning experience for me. It's my first time going through, proposed amendment, and it's good to hear all the conversation. I appreciate neighbors like Mr. Kennedy coming out and giving input as well and being engaged. I do have a question with regard to that. If we're going to entertain, the other waterways, great point with Meridian, are we going to look at it each waterway specifically, or will we be able, is that how it's written currently? Do we know that?
Brian?
I guess that's a question for Brian. I mean,
Sure, I understand what you're
are we going to
asking.
take a look at it, like we looked at it specific to Thoroughfare Canal? So then if we look at making additional adjustments, is it going to be designated by each waterway, or will we take a look at all of them and see how they all fit into
We'll
that?
take a look at all of them, see how they fit in the ordinance. If the regulations, let's say that what's in front of you passes the board, and we do the further research on the 3 or 4 other internal canals, and the language we have is a fit, then what we would do is we would just massage our 1B district fronting Thoroughfare Canal, and we would kind of flip that into along internal canals or internal waterways. If it's a fit, if we find there are some distinctions that we want to separate out, we can just add another row and we can come up with some parameters that maybe work better for a different neighborhood. We don't want to get, we don't want to have too many, we already have quite a few different standards, but if we look at it and one of these, whether it's a yard location, a setback, a size issue, just does not make sense with what we've studied in a given area, then we would probably want to create something fresh. But if it looks like these parameters work well, we can just massage this into broader application.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Kyle?
I watched the meeting when you all discussed this. I like the solution you all came to. I like the flexibility of it. So yeah, just in general. And Mr. Kennedy, your comments are really great too. So thank you for bringing that to the attention of this commission. I would just add, if there are issues that are coming up with approvals or complaints, that I would like to know about that for the areas you were talking about. But yeah, I'm really excited about the about this change.
Thank you, Kyle. Dan?
I think we arrived at a good solution for this, and I do think it would be ideal to apply these same rules to other waterways, and so I'll be interested in the future here when we start reviewing other waterways.
Thank you. John?
A couple comments. One is that this process is the way that it's supposed to work, right? The subcommittee had some concerns brought to them. They got together, they discussed some possibilities of remedying some restrictive ordinances. You guys brought it here, we met on it, we had great conversation, we made some key changes, and we got what is in front of us here now from Brian that is exactly what we all discussed. It was just a wonderful process that we went through, and I think as we move forward, looking at some of these maybe restrictive ordinances and some people's opinions, that we continue this process because it works. One, I'm going to admit something here. So when we were going through this, I used to live on Frenchman's Creek, and we're going through this, and I kind of like, why aren't we talking about Frenchman's Creek too? I mean, this is like, and I don't know if I just didn't want to like confuse anything. Let's just do this and this move. I don't know, but Phil, you're exactly right. I mean, it wasn't something that was planned to exclude from this, right? This is our first attempt of making these changes, and I'm sure we're going to go in that direction pretty quick. But like Chairman Schweikart said, we got to get this one through here, get it to the board, get it passed, and then move on. But subcommittee, good job. Planning Commission, good job. And Brian, great job of bringing this back to us. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Brian?
My feelings are the same as my fellow commissioners up here, so in the sake of brevity, I have no further questions and feel comfortable proceeding.
All right, then on that note, I would entertain a recommendation regarding the proposed amendment to the waterfront ordinance as outlined by Brian. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion to approve from Mr. Rato. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Eric.
Franca.
Discussion. Hearing none, call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Very good. Brian, would you please put this in the format of a findings of fact so that Kyle can present that to the board? Kyle, when do you think that's going to hit the board?
That is a good question. Part of why I went over there to speak to Mr. Hancock was it sounded like he wanted that urgently. Obviously, the next board meeting is next Monday. I think the agenda's already been put out for that, but I might just try to get at least Mr. Hancock's requests in there. This one, it might have to wait till the following board meeting, but if you all feel like I should rush it, I'm open to talking to Mr. Budney about that. So whatever you all think, honestly.
We'll get the, Brian will get the findings of fact to you, and then you can get it scheduled as soon as you can.
I think for me, at least for where I'm at, I'd rather wait till not the Monday meeting, but the following one for this one, just because it's important. I don't want to rush this. I think what you all have done is a lot of good work on this, and I'd want to bring that to the board in a good way instead of rushing it before them.
Very good. That'll be to your discretion.
Okay, sounds good.
And as far as these other items are concerned, once we get the go-ahead from the board, I would ask the subcommittee and Brian, that we get together and reform to discuss the other potential areas. In the meantime, I think we'll have an opportunity to gather some data, kind of like what we did before, and so that we will actually know what we're talking about. That is always a good thing. Okay. Then we're going to move on now at this point to discussion items. The first is the master plan. Master plan discussion. Brian, you and I were, I think, exchanging emails about this, and you were going to put something together to kind of outline how the process is kind of shaking out to update the plan. It isn't what I had anticipated. There was a lot more obviously going on behind the scenes that I knew about.
Yeah.
And so perhaps you can educate all of us
Yeah.
where this stands.
I will, there's, nothing is in stone at this point, so do keep that in mind. This is a situation that will work itself out, but we still need to get a lot of people's input on it before an actual decision was made. And I'm going to try to keep this part kind of brief because I do want to make sure we give Ross his due, and there is a connection between this conversation and Ross's presentation on redevelopment ready communities. So you all will recall, those of us that were here, I think pretty much everyone, sorry again, Kyle, I'm gonna keep singling you out until you've been around a long time. I'm just kidding. So 2 years ago, year and a half ago, we undertook our last 5-year review of the master plan. I think everybody, we kind of came to the conclusion that while the plan still reflects the goals and values of the community, I think we all understood that it was kind of nearing its lifespan in certain areas. The plan is now 20 years old, so it has served you well for a very long time. We had kind of focused in on a couple of items as part of that last 5-year review where I think we all felt if we were going to put some attention into an update, we would want to take a look at the Macomb Street chapter. And then also one of the other big things that has come up over the last several years would be a relook or visiting some different housing options, not just large detached single family lots, but putting in some more flexibility and allowing a little more creativity and some different scenarios. So we had kind of whittled our way into that, and that was sort of the thought process, was that we would at some point in the near future enter into and start a process for not minor. I don't mean to belittle it, but it would have been a relatively minor update to the plan. We would have updated certainly existing conditions, demographics, those sorts of things, gotten DDA involved in terms of Macomb Street, and making sure that chapter really reflects what the work that DDA has done, the work that we've seen done on Macomb Street, and getting some input again into some other housing variety and other options. In the time since we've kind of had those conversations, Ross has been hired. Welcome, Ross. And Ross has been working with the MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, on pursuing township certification in what is called the RRC program, Redevelopment Ready Communities. And one of the beautiful things about this program is it gives you access to MEDC funding, and a lot of it. So they do a fantastic job. I have 2 other client communities that are in the RRC program, and they have really leveraged the program to some really good projects in those particular municipalities. MEDC provides pretty high match ratios on projects. Items in need of technical assistance could be ordinance review, could be ordinance work, could be site-specific economic development activities, can also be put into master planning process. So I think what we have to figure out is how we can connect these dots and when we can connect these dots. I think, Ross, he's got the township into the process. There's still a lot of work that has to be done to get through the whole process, but at such point as we figure out when the township is eligible to start applying for some funding, that will be an opportunity to maybe take on a little bit bigger project than I think we had originally envisioned. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're throwing out the current plan and starting from scratch. I don't think anybody would do that. There's still a lot of very valuable items in there, and quite frankly, change is a little slow in this community. So I don't think a lot has changed in, sad to say, 20 years. It's been a long time, but definitely it's in need of some updates. And I think with the township potentially having access to some real funds and not having to scrape it together yourselves, because full master planning process can get quite expensive. So I think the ability to get some outside funding and then have the township have to match a smaller portion of it, you could essentially put the same budget forth for what we were going to do, maybe a little bit more than that, but you're going to get, with the MEDC money, potentially get enough money to do a much more thorough, much larger update to the plan. So we're kind of at that point where we still have to have some more conversations. Ross and I have been talking about this a little bit. I know that Kyle's had some input through John and with Ross as well. We still need to have communication with township administration. We've got to talk to Derek. We need to, bring Jim on board and make sure ultimately, when all of the dominoes are lined up, that the board and the commission are open to entering into that process, and then we'll kind of take it from there. The bigger, this potentially bigger scope of a project, this could be a 9 to 12 month process. So you're going to have to be ready, and you're going to have to be ready to participate. It will probably up our meetings a little bit, whereas right now we're kind of every other month, every 3 months. If we do enter into a plan update process, we're probably going to want to have more working sessions with the commission to kind of help you guys bring this thing really into good shape. And then I don't want to get into all of the details of the process, but it's really lengthy, but it's also very straightforward. The state law dictates every step of what has to be done, and we'll check all those boxes. And it'll involve the Planning Commission a lot. Planning Commission has a very heavy load in terms of preparing a master plan update. So you all will be involved to a great extent. We may even look at maybe forming some smaller subcommittee groups. We can have a few people looking into, talking one topic and a few others talking different topics. A lot of ways that this can be handled. So I don't have much more than that. I guess I wanted to say tonight, John. I can take any questions, obviously, that you guys might have about the process or the law or what's required. But what I really wanted to do was, make sure that we got Ross in here tonight to talk to you a little bit more about RRC, and then kind of have that dovetail, or have mine dovetail into his, in terms of what that might mean for the township in terms of a master plan process, at a future date.
Several comments first. I gathered from one of your email comments that you would not be leading the master plan effort, that there would be a third-party contractor hired?
Well, that'll be to be determined. That's something that we'll have to, if the township wants to take on a much larger scope of a project to the tune of, much larger budget, then I am happy to assist in whatever way I can. I probably cannot manage that whole project. I'm a staff of 1 with 12 client communities. So trying to do a $100,000 master plan by myself probably isn't going to happen.
Well, okay, then how is it that the scope will actually be determined? As I look at the master plan, and I look, for example, at the natural features section of the master plan, for example, it is what it is, okay? And who will make a judgment as to whether that is adequate or it needs to be part of a $100,000 rewrite?
Well, so the township will dictate the scope that it wants to whomever does the work, whether it's me or whether it's someone else. So the township will be able to dictate what you want done in this process. And then it's up to the consultant team to prepare scope of work in line with your budget and your wants and needs.
Well, I come back again. Is that a staff function or is that a planning commission function? Is that us looking at that particular section and saying, yes, we think it's okay, or no, we don't think it's okay, or is it somebody else? How is that going to work?
That's a great question. At this juncture, I couldn't tell you, John.
Because in the end, that determines whether this is a $50,000 project, a $10,000 project, or a $100,000 project.
Sure.
Somebody's got to make that judgment.
Yep. Well, I think all parties need to work together to figure out what it is you guys want.
Okay. Well, as this moves forward, there's going to have to be some very clear roles and responsibilities, so that we don't end up doing something that we don't need to do, or not doing something that we should be doing,
Sure.
one way or the other. Okay, and that process has to be laid out.
Yep.
And I would think this planning commission would be a big part of that. I mean, we prepared the last master plan. That was our work. Your work, too. You were here for that.
I was not. My firm's work, though.
It was LSL.
Yeah.
LSL? Oh, okay, that wasn't
My
you.
old firm, but you guys adopted it before I started.
Okay. Well, so that is one factor.
Absolutely.
For sure. The other factor is 9 to 12 months, to my thinking, based on, the last time we did this was very optimistic. I mean, what was it the last time? 18 months? I mean,
yeah, so I just I led the process 20 years ago as a freshman commissioner, and it was at least 12 months, closer to 18 months. It involved LSL, it involved CE Rains, it involved a whole host of people, lots and lots of public input. And at that point in time, it was a redevelopment from the 1965 master plan.
Right, you're right. We had
So
very
it was
old-
a massive project.
I think what you're taking on is an update to a 20-year-old plan instead of an update to a 40-year-old plan. And with modern technologies and the ability to have remote work, the ability to get public input without necessarily having huge public gathering sessions, I don't, there's no reason it should take 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, John, you said it right.
But that's not up to me.
It's a matter of scoping it, right? I mean, the master plan's fairly well laid out. I forgot how many sections there are, but it's just a matter of we look at each section and say, okay, what do we want to do, if anything, to this section, and then move on, right? And Brian said that there's the current status, right? That's easy staff work to be done, and then the rest of it's really, what do we want to plan?
Well, I would go ahead and propose that, as you're discussing this with, the township leadership, the put the planning commission role, right up front in terms of helping the township to define. There isn't anybody in this township that knows what needs to be done on that master plan better than us.
Absolutely.
Okay, because we've been working with it for years.
Sure.
And so we ought to be in a very good position to say thumbs up, thumbs down, or we don't know. Okay, and then use that as a guide so that others can then scope out the project to whatever dollar value and whatever resource level is needed.
Yeah, again, I mean,
I'm interested in comments on this.
Yeah, hey, John, so I was on the board when we did this, okay? And here's how it worked, and I remember when Eric got involved with this. I wasn't on the planning commission because I had to leave the planning commission because I was elected to the board, and then I went over to the airport as a liaison.
Yeah, I took your spot.
Yeah.
Or you-
And he's outshined me ever since.
I still have the Target shirt you gave me.
Yeah, right. So the way that this worked, and I thought it worked great, this was kind of a philosophy change, right, within the township, how we as a township function with our ordinances and what we want. And back then, over 20 years ago, we were greatly concerned about build out. We did a lot of study of what the island would look like at current rate of development back then, and it was not good. It was good for a builder, but not good for the quality of life on Grosse Ile. So the direction, well, let me kind of say it this way. We put it on the shoulders of the Planning Commission for the exact reason that you said, John, is that nobody knows more than what is needed than the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission deals with it all the time. The Planning Commission then, as Eric will know, did a lot of public hearings and a lot of public input. But there's a key piece, and this cannot be understated, and that is the elected officials. So we had involvement from the elected officials. We didn't get, some elected officials may have been involved more than others, but there was certainly involvement with the elected officials of direction on how and what we thought needed to happen from a planning perspective. So the way that I see this is the blueprint has already been established on how to do it effectively, because it was pretty effective. There's no doubt about it. That plan back 20-some years ago was effective in accomplishing our objectives. We have different objectives now. So what I would like is, certainly the board needs to buy into this. If the board doesn't say, hey, we need to do this, and yes, we want to have these ordinances looked at, we want to have a new plan put together, and grant the ability to do that to the Planning Commission, then we're just going to be doing what you said, John. We're going to be doing something we shouldn't be doing. We're going to be not doing something we should be doing, and it's going to be not a good process, and possibly a waste of money, or not have spent enough money. So I think that the process really needs to, we've already started it with Kyle, because this has been his, I think, passion. I think Kyle needs to go back to the board, get a consensus. Hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. This is what we want to do. We have a master plan, and we want to go through this. I'm lobbying for the Planning Commission to take this over, right? And have the hearings and take as long as it's needed, right? I mean, I think maybe it doesn't need to be 18 months like it was before. You know, maybe it's 8 months or 9 months, or what part of the plan needs to be changed and what can stay the same, which makes sense. But I would just kind of caution that unless the board is behind this and that they are providing us the authority to do it, we risk wasting time and money.
Great point.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, legally, the board has to authorize initiation of a plan amendment. So you guys can't do it without the board's authorization.
That's just the initiation of the plan, right? There's a bigger, what is the plan?
Correct.
Okay, we're talking about a cultural shift here, right? We just passed an ordinance for a kindler and gentler process of putting sheds in, which was huge. Okay, now Kyle is here, and he's real passionate about this. And quite honestly, I think that there's people that have been coming in front of the Planning Commission, and we're sitting here going, geez, that ordinance isn't really good. I mean, we want to grant it to them, right? But our hands are tied, right? So there's a lot of ordinances, I think, that need to be looked at. Some need to be changed. But it's what does the elected officials want in the development of this community? That's what it comes down to. They're in charge of that in the philosophy. So I would think that Kyle needs to go figure that out and come back. And,
Thanks for telling me what to do. No, just kidding. Just quickly, I'll say, so the board has already started a process and I'm sorry to steal a little bit from you, Ross, but at the last board meeting, the board did vote in favor of a redevelopment ready community program. So this thing that Ross is going to talk about is part of the board getting involved in that, and it was a unanimous vote. I will say, while we have you, Brian, if I may, I'm excited about the redevelopment ready community program for a lot of different reasons. And again, I don't want to steal Ross's thunder, but one thing I have noticed is a lot of communities haven't gone through the full process, and it sounds like you know of others. So I was wondering if you knew reasons why communities get hung up, and I'm going to just guess. The redevelopment ready community program through the master plan isn't just going to suggest a master plan process, but it's also going to suggest updates to our zoning, I assume. And maybe a lot of communities just are slow or decide that that's not something they want to do. So I'm just curious if you know.
Well, yeah, the certification program is quite lengthy. I mean, they look at all of your review procedures, they look at your plan, they look at your ordinances, and they will give you back a number of items. You'll get a checklist of the things that you need to address to gain the certification. Now, my understanding, though, I think the trick is that as long as you're entered into the process, you can still apply for some funding to do some of the things that they're telling you that you need to do. But I think a lot of communities get into it and either they just, it's too daunting of a task for staff to take on. A number of things, again, if you have the ability to use some funding from MEDC, that's great. But in those instances where you can't, it can become quite costly too. So a lot of communities probably don't have the budgets to do all of the things, at least in short order, that MEDC is going to come back and suggest that you do.
Thank you. And I'll just say, I know since Ross has come here, Jim has been like, yeah, let's approach this, Mr. Budney. So it seems like there's an opening here. The big question for me is whether this is the RRC program is going to be the way we do this, or there's other options too. Like, because we're along the Great Lakes, there's also other types of grant funding for master plan and/or zoning processes. So that's going to be the big issue at the board that I've got to figure out, whether we go through this process or a different process. So yeah, I will commit to that. This is something I'm passionate about and have been before this. So I will work with the board to get what we did. And I hear Mr. Schweikart, what you're saying. There needs to be clear scoping and responsibilities and who's responsible for what. So I will work on that as well. Yep.
Good. Okay. Anything else that we want to discuss relative to the master plan at this point?
If you don't mind, I'd like to take a few minutes to just put my full support towards the master plan update and give you a couple of reasons why. I know that my fellow commissioners might have heard me talk about this in the past. I've been one of the voices that has been asking us to do this for years. And I know in the past, like, there's been issues related to the costs, and I hear the cost issues coming back up. And so I want to say that while there is a cost for action, there's also costs for inaction. And, we really need to figure out a plan to move forward. And as others had said, make sure that it's a buy-in. It's not just a planning commission thing. It's not just a zoning board thing, but it's the township board, it's the school board, it's, all of the organizations. This can be much more than just a land use plan update. This can be a vision for our community. And, looking into that, we need to do this because so many things have changed. We're in a community that's part of Downriver, part of Wayne County, a part that some people feel, Wayne County ignores. Especially, when we look at some of the roads and things of those issues. But Wayne County has also been, struggling. It's harder to develop, and, on a different scale, it's going through the same things. And we're part of the Michigan and part of the Midwest. And so, we have, these aging infrastructure and aging people, paradigm shifts. And so we really need to be able to react to that. So again, I think it's more than just land use. It's more than just zoning. But, it's about buy-in, it's a vision, it's about economic development, because we have all these ideas that we want to move forward with. DPS is talking about doing millages for the roads. The school board's talking about expanding the schools. I know from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission that we will need a millage in order to maintain and expand, trails and shared use paths and bicycle infrastructure. And all that costs money. And if we don't grow the community, we're asking people, residents that might be on fixed incomes to spend more of their money on these existing services. And when you have a bridge that's going out, and another bridge that's almost as old, we have to look at these things holistically and see, like, how do we grow the community and get people to come here? So again, I think that we should be looking at Macomb Street. We should be looking at the school board. We also need to be looking at open space. We buy up lots of land, which is great, but maybe we need to evaluate that and have that be a part of this larger vision of what's good quality open space versus what might be better suited for a different resource. Maybe something, and I don't want to make any hot button issues here, but maybe some of that can be used to expand the footprint of the downtown area and make it more advantageous for a walkable community. There might be stuff that makes more sense to actually be used for some of the newer housing, because again, we're an aging community, so we want people to be able to age in place. So maybe they're not in the same 2,000 or 3,000 square foot house, but maybe they're in a condo, maybe they're in a smaller home. Same, we want to be able to have our children and our grandchildren be able to grow up here and be able to afford a home. So I think that's really important. As I mentioned before, since we're wrapping it up here, talking about being holistic. Again, my commission with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission has been putting together a plan for years. We'd be happy to include those contents as part of the master plan update. And we have things like complete streets that were passed. So we need to look at that and micromobility. And I know I'm adding a lot of things on here, and some people are probably thinking about price tags. So I will just say that in my day job, I work for SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, and we do have planning assistance grants. Those grants and what's competitive changes from year to year, but there's always has been a call for those, and a lot of times they focus in on like transportation or other aspects, and so maybe that can be used as supplemental income towards a master plan update. So thank you for letting me speak, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Good points. Additional comments?
Yeah, if I could.
Jay?
Yeah, I think the process, whatever that process is a good idea for us to undertake some sort of a review. My only fear is that the scope creep begins to us spending a lot of time on things that don't need time. And if we do, then we're not going to have time for things where we should be spending the time. And I'm not suggesting any of the ones you said, Brian, are not the right things for us to spend time on. I don't mean it's because I followed you that I'm saying I'm addressing you. That's not the intent at all. But I think there are things that don't need to be revisited. While I love the idea that there are grants available, whether it's from the state, the MEDC specifically, or from other regional, whether it's regional states or regional communities, those are still tax dollars, and they're coming from somewhere, largely from us, although shared is better than all coming directly from Grosse Ile. But they're still tax dollars, and I just hesitate to run rampant and just do things that don't need to be done. But I think, which is why I think that scoping process at the beginning, like I'd like to see an exercise where we take all of the sections of the master plan and we review them one at a time and say, kind of over a period of time, and then say, okay, if there are 20 of them, we think 8 of them don't need to be touched, or they only need to be refreshed, or something like that. Put that in front of the township board. Does the township board agree? If we all agree, we just do that. Now the scope is 12. And then we move on from there, and then we focus our time. But I think if we don't do that, we'll end up with just kind of setting a ball rolling where we're going to look at 20 things, and we're going to run through a process that the state dictates, and we end up, not only spending a lot of money, but a lot of time, and ending up with something that may not be as good as it even is right now. So that's my only hesitation, is that if we just kind of say, hey, we've got dollars, let's go, that we'll end up spending a lot of money and not really accomplishing anything. Having said that, I think the community has changed. I remember having the conversation 20 years ago when the light bulb was going off that, maybe this R1C idea isn't a great one, and that it was going to affect the the fire department and the volunteer fire and the schools and the school age population. But the ball was rolling on that already, and we were, as John suggested, much more concerned about the build out than we were about those things. And the population is aging much more, and so there are things we ought to revisit, and priorities have changed some, and we ought to be open to those things. And I thought it was a great exercise when we did it. It was kind of one of my early things on the planning commission, and we learned a lot about the community in the process. I think the whole community learned a lot about the community in the process. Everybody that participated in it. So I think it's good. I just don't want to see it take on a life of its own, and we end up wasting a lot of time and money. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Jay. Additional thoughts?
I think I'd like to wrap it up. I was kind of curious to see what some of the other inputs were. I'm very familiar with the program. It's something that I looked into quite a lot during my time at DDA, and when I met and connected with Ross, I was thrilled, to say the least, that it was something that he was already looking into, because he's only been here for a short time. I think one of the reasons that we weren't able to get past looking into it from a DDA perspective was that we need that full-time resource. We need the time, the energy, the scope, the wherewithal to get it done, and it wasn't going to happen previously. I think, dare I say, we would be crazy to not do it, given the enthusiasm behind it from both Brian and from Ross, and seeing what other communities have been able to do with it. I also agree that we need inputs from the board, and we need buy-in from all of the groups and the stakeholders, but I also would caution that we go at it with a solution-based thought process. I think there are resources, benchmarking available. There's so much more available from folks that are looking from the outside in and looking at communities that, like us, that are sitting on 20-year-old master plan. And it's probably time, maybe not to redo the entire plan, but let's not hesitate to look at it from the perspective of, let's maybe plan for the next 20 years, right? Or what we have in front of us, and look at it, I think, to use Brian's word, as a vision. So personally, I'm thrilled that you're here already in front of us, bringing this as an option. I would love to be involved. I'll move my evening things around if I need to, give my inputs. I think that we live in a awesome community, but there's always room for improvement. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Angela. Any other comments on this at the moment? There'll be lots of opportunity here in the months ahead, for sure. Okay, well, Brian, thank you.
Thank you.
For leading that discussion, and we'll now go to the Redevelopment Ready Community Program.
All right, everyone, thanks for having me. Just going off of Jay's point, I think that the good thing about this program, that it really forces us to look, especially at the Community Development Department, to kind of look at the ordinances and everything that we have in place right now to see if there is any updating. So a lot of the legwork is going to come from the Community Development Department, which is me. But so there, I mean, I'll continually be giving you guys my feedback on what I've gotten, working with Brian and with Derek and Jim, just constantly, here's what I found, what I might actually be annoying Jim and Derek on a day-to-day basis about, hey, did you think about this, or what's this, or, asking for different forms and everything. So in that regard, I feel like a lot of legwork will be sort of me, with the help of you guys, of course. But kind of to dive into this a little bit more, so the Redevelopment Ready program is through Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So the MEDC, in collaboration with more than 100 economic development partners, markets Michigan as a place to do business, assists businesses in their growth strategies, and fosters the growth of vibrant communities across the state. I'm going to breeze through this a little bit since we're running low on time, but the RSC is a voluntary technical assistance initiative available to communities across the state, which empowers communities to shape their future by building a foundation of planning, zoning, and economic development best practices and integrating them into everyday functions. So, like Brian had mentioned, they provide match funding for master plans, corridor plans, capital improvement plans, which is something that the township needs to incorporate, updated zoning, board and commission training. So they offer match funding for us to go to the Michigan Association of Planning for training for updating our master plan. And access to programs like the Michigan Main Street Developer Toolkits, et cetera. So why should we participate? They provide a locally driven streamlined development review process, which is something that we definitely need. Ongoing technical assistance, access to match funding, prioritization for MEDC community development incentive tools, and access to the redevelopment services team, which is basically I would be the point of contact to ask for them for questions in regard to updating certain things or looking at a review process for development. So I've been sort of going through all of our forms and our processes and all the things in place, asking Brittany if we have building permits online and all these other things. So in the past month since this has passed, been looking at kind of all the things that we need to do, right? So update our master plan, of course, CIP, public participation plan as well. We need to outline our zoning ordinance with our master plan, which it sounds like we've kind of already been working on. Make all plans accessible online, offer diverse housing, incorporate some green infrastructure into our master plan, and maybe on Macomb Street offer some parking flexibility to allow for more walkable Macomb Street. Next is define development review processes, provide conceptual review meeting details, have a clear internal review process, update our fee schedule, which is very much needed, and payment methods. Electronic or online payment methods for fees or whatnot. And provide a consistent tracking system for new projects, so we know exactly where we are on the community development side in the development process. And then provide recruitment processes for boards and commissions, create a training plan for boards and commission members, and hold orientation for new members. And we must also provide an annual report for planning commission, which I think was done in 2019. Okay. Oh, okay. I couldn't find the latest one, so all right, thanks. And then next, so we're going through with the essentials, and then from essential, then you be certified. So it's kind of like a two-phase approach. So the next approach at step number 5 would create an economic development strategy plan, provide locally available economic development tools to encourage development. And that'd be like things like we have a facade grant program and other things that help, that we can, grants that we have for businesses. So it costs us nothing, just the work of community development department. These are the steps. I'm not going to go over each one. We've completed most of them, or not most of them, but on the left side there, you'll see that most of those are completed. We just have to sign an MOU with RRC. So they will be providing a baseline evaluation. I've provided them all the documents that we have at the Community Development Department, all of our ordinances, everything that I had accessible to me. And then they're basically going to review all those documents and kind of fill in the blanks of what do we need to kind of get to that essential status. They just switched over a planner, so it's going to be another month before they get everything reviewed. So stay tuned for that. And then incorporating the missing RRC best practices, which would again be me, and working with RRC on how to best kind of implement those. And then after that, it would be just maintaining the plan that they provided, and that we've earned during the essential certification. So, and this can take up to 9 months or 5 years. It doesn't matter. It's at the pace of the township, however we feel is best. There's no process of us getting rushed. RC doesn't put any pressure on us. So. There are 64 other certified communities, 5 essential communities, and like Kyle had mentioned before, there's a lot of engaged communities but have not reached that essential or certified community status. Those granted are, as you can see, kind of smaller towns who might have the issue of maybe staff turnover or, a community that's just not willing to change or what have you, so. And these are similar sized certified communities with roughly the same population as Grosse Ile, so. And that's all I have. Questions?
Okay, yeah, let's have some questions and discussion on this. I'll kind of start. I think it's always a good idea at some point to have a third pair of eyes sitting outside the box, so to speak, looking in, because sometimes when you're on the inside, you see what you want to see. You don't necessarily see what's there. And so that lends, you become myopic. So this offers an opportunity to get a third-party perspective. As I think about this is very, very similar to, in many ways, to in my business career in manufacturing, chemical manufacturing. We received audits all the time. Experts would come in, they'd review documents, they'd interview, they'd evaluate, they'd discuss, and they'd provide recommendations for which we would follow up. Very similar in process. Some things here are a little bit different, though, and it is a bit of a concern. Obviously, what they've defined what they term the best practices, which is global or statewide, whatever. And in reading on the internet, they said evaluations are conducted by an RRC team through interviews, document review, and data analysis. Has an RRC team been here?
No.
Who is that?
So it's an RRC planner that's localized to Southeast Michigan, and they will come and present to the board when they complete the baseline report.
Okay. But this says here they're going to conduct interviews. Is the RRC planner going to come here and speak with me, for example, or the head of DDA, or
right?
I mean, other people who, at least in their particular area, have some level of expertise.
Right.
The officers of the Planning Commission. How is that interaction, or is it only with you?
No, so they're going to come speak in front of the board. They've gone to from my knowledge, they go in front of the board or city council and kind of present what their baseline report is.
Well, how do they know what the baseline report is if they haven't talked to the people that manage the baseline?
Well, the baseline report is based off of the documents that I give them, and based off of what's missing in those documents. And
okay. Well, I can appreciate in certain areas, for example, with for example, visibility of the the zoning map needs to be on the website.
Right.
Okay, that's a yes/no question. That's real easy. It's either there or it's not there.
Yeah.
Okay, you get into the subtleties of zoning,
right,
and master plan, and you're looking at community values.
Right.
Okay, and if a person on the outside does not understand what the community values are, how is he in a position, or she in a position, to present a report without talking to the people who basically provide the reasoning behind it?
I think that you're reading too much into it, because they don't tell us what exactly goes in the master plan. They just say you need to update your master plan every 5 years. It doesn't. They aren't. I think the one thing that they would like to see in the master plan is what Brian mentioned, is complete streets, which is Brian could probably speak to this better than I can, but it's basically clear sidewalks, clearly defined crosswalks, things of that nature. And am I on the right path there?
Sure, yeah. Those sorts of things, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about some of the other elements in this, which are specifically zoning related.
Right.
Where they're talking about changing or changing what might be by our definition might be special land use to basic standard site plan, which means that the controls that the Planning Commission has for regulating the content of what might go into an individual neighborhood could be potentially taken away. All right, and if they're coming from a judgment of development is the right thing, okay, which it may be, or it may not be, if it takes the tool away from the Planning Commission or the township to be able to manage it, that's a problem.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think that they would. I don't think it goes that deep into.
Well,
you know,
I
you
don't
have
know.
to
In
change your
reading this, you know, and I get all the way down to the bottom here. And the other thing I don't like is they throw the report over the fence. Okay, what I'm used to from the business environment is that the experts interact with all of us. Okay?
Right.
And they gather their findings. They get together and they huddle and they present results back. They don't throw a report over the fence and say, here it is. They come back to us and they sit down with us and they say, here's what we found and here's why we found it. And again, from my business experience, what you find is there are misunderstandings.
Right.
Oh, we really didn't think about that. Okay,
Yeah.
this is this way because of that. Okay?
I'm sure
and
that-
you rationalize it before a final report gets thrown out. Because the last thing that's on here is, if you're going to get certified, they use the word must meet all applicable standards.
Right.
All. Not 90% or 80% or 99%.
Right.
That means if they come across and they've decided that something is wrong in our zoning and we don't agree, okay?
Yeah, that's why it was recommended that we go through the essentials process first, because there might be some of those disagreements, or we might have to hash some of those
Well,
things out
essentials
with them.
is easier, but it has the same standard. So, you know, nothing is free. Okay,
Yeah.
I encourage you to pursue this, but I would encourage you to pursue it from the standpoint that more people need to be involved than simply you. And it's more than a remote planner sitting at the other side of the state telling us what should and shouldn't be in our community.
Right.
He should be here.
fully agree.
He should see and he should learn.
Fully
Or
agree.
she, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Okay?
I fully agree.
So if it isn't that way, I would hope that you would work to make it that way.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Other comments?
Yeah, John, between you and Jay, you just nailed it, and you have Eric, okay? So we've already done this, and it worked. I get we have, you know, the possibility of having somebody give us money for it. We take money, they take control, and we don't want to lose that control. It's got to come from
not the-
this
that's not
commission.
the-
It's
that's
got to
not-
come from the people that went through it. There's got to be a buy-in from the board to give the direction of this commission, whether it's John, whether it's the subcommittee, whether it's other people on this commission, to review what are the top concerns and address those and control those in this report, and not risk something coming back that we don't want, but we're forced to do it or we lose funding.
It's
Can
not
I-
the case.
Okay.
That's not the case at all with this program. I think we're missing the boat on what the idea behind this program is. They're not coming to audit us. They're not coming to tell us what we need to do or what we need to look like. We're asking them to say, hey, based on improvements in other communities, what's happening in the world globally, in small towns, in the state, in the county, what do you see? And bring us this helpful information, bring us this support, bring us these resources, and then we'll choose how we do it. But it's not them coming to us and saying, do this 98% right and we'll give you a certification. If we don't want to do it at the end of it, then big deal, we're not certified. No skin. Like you're thinking way too far in advance. They're not coming to us with an audit. They're not coming to us telling us what we're doing wrong. They're coming to us and saying, you live in a great community, you have a decent downtown that a lot of other communities would kill for as a starting block, but these are some small steps you can make and adjustments to your 20-year-old plan that would bring it up to snuff for today's standards and improve it so that people want to continue to buy here, move here, put their kids in school here, retire here, stick around in the long term. We've got to stop looking at it as people are coming at us. This is a support, and I'm super grateful that we have someone who wants to put the resources in this township staff into it, because up to this point we have not had the capability or the mindset to do so. So I think what we need to say is, Ross, in my opinion, continue down this path. Keep looking at any support. If there is funding and grants available, bring it to us, because free money and free programs are always better to dig into than to stop and say thanks but no thanks, because it's going to tell us something that we don't want to hear or that we don't want to work toward, because it might take 18 months. I mean, we have got to stop in this community looking at things like people are coming at us all the time. This is a good thing. If we don't like what they bring, then we don't approve it, but we talk through it. It's always better to have somebody's input. I mean, I look here, half of you guys have said you worked through it 20 years ago. I think that's great and great experience, but God, I'm glad Kyle and I are here to give a little input on what it might be like to go through it again in a new thought process. I've lived here 7 years. I don't know what it was like 20 years ago, but I'm happy to say that, 7 years ago when I moved here, I saw a lot of opportunity in this community, and I want to stay here for the long term. And I want my kids to continue to have places to go, things to do. And when I'm retired, I want to be able to walk places, and I want to be able to live in a place that's not 4 acres big, that's, might be a little more manageable. And, we have got to start thinking about what everyone else wants, as opposed to the folks that sit behind the mic every night, and we need to just go at it from that mindset.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Chair.
Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to let you know that when I was back in college studying urban planning, I actually went through a version of this program. It was redevelopment ready, but it was done by the Michigan Suburbs Alliance. So the MSA, started this years ago. And like the Michigan Economic Development Corporation saw that and made it better. So I can tell you from experience of being on the other side, as a student, I was reviewing things in the city of Warren and just going through and looking at it. And then we did have conversations with those staff. And so I would envision that similar things would happen here. And as my fellow colleagues have said, this is an open process. It's more of a playbook. So we can look at things within this playbook or toolkit to say, hey, this makes sense for us. And maybe there's other things that don't. So I wouldn't worry so much about, like if someone's going to come in and tell us exactly what to do. And at the end of the day, what we're, I believe the redevelopment ready process is trying to do is just make things open and transparent for the developers and anyone that's coming in. And that's the goals of our planning commission and what we're going through as far as looking at our ordinances and seeing what's working, what's not. So it's basically the same thing from that standpoint. That we're just going to take an honest assessment of what's going on and see if there's ways that we can improve. So again, you have my full support, but I'm just one commissioner here.
Thank you.
Well, I'm pleased to hear about your interactive experience, because that's exactly what I'm looking for. I support this, but I support it from the standpoint of we can all participate. Jay.
Sheriff, I might. I similar to the discussion about the master plan, I think there's a lot here that's interesting. I think we can learn and hear from others. I'm going to say this, it's going to sound more sarcastic than I mean it to, though, but there's a little bit of, I'm here from Washington, and I'm here to help, that makes me nervous. And I wonder about, I hope I'm wrong, but is there an element of the funding that's, makes all this free, that's tied to us doing the things that we're told to do? There are aspects that, in the same way you don't want the, Lansing telling us how to run our schools. We don't want us telling us how to run our community. Having said that, I think we can learn from others. We shouldn't close our eyes and say we don't want to hear. We ought to listen to everything, but at the end of the day, Grosse Ile is a somewhat unique place. And there are things that we do here that make sense to be different than others. And there are things that we do here that are different because we just don't think about it. And so we ought to be able to tell the difference as we go through a process like this. And so I would be supportive of moving forward with it, fully supportive. I would also be supportive of us keeping an eye out, looking at everything, making sure we're not committing ourselves to something that we shouldn't be as we go through the process. So I think I'm agreeing with almost everything I've heard at the table.
Gotcha.
So,
I mean, if we would like to, we don't have to apply for any of these match funding. We don't have to collect a dime from them. It's just basically they're giving an assessment of how we're doing things at the community development side and how we're doing things, our internal processes and our documents that we have on board compared to other communities, compared to, what's new practices that are going on. That's all that they're giving recommendations. Whether we take those recommendations or not, that's up to the planning commission or the board itself. So as far as being tied down to anything, that's not the case. It's just, if we want the funding, we can get it, and if we don't want the funding and pay full for a master plan, then we can do that as well. There's no not loose ends. What's the saying? Yeah.
If we want the funding, do we have to do what they tell us to do, or what they recommend that we do, or the funding is pulled? That's the question that I have.
So,
I don't know the answer to that. As I sit here.
Yeah, so we can have a master plan that doesn't mention complete streets, for instance, and then we wouldn't get that the certification. So we would get access to the funding, but if we don't mention something like complete streets, then we don't get the certification, the RRC certification. Granted, having complete streets mentioned is a very small thing. They're not asking, it wouldn't be like a large.
I'm not fighting complete streets at this point.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
I don't know what it is.
It's the things that they're asking.
Don't put me on record as being
complete
streets.
The things that they're asking for.
complete streets, and not for incomplete streets in any way.
Right. I think that you'll find if you look through what they're saying, these are the best practices. That's nothing over top. They're not asking that we have 10-foot story hotel buildings or anything. It's nothing radical in that regard. So, yeah.
Okay, additional thoughts from anybody?
For me, I don't know if it's helpful, but just looking at the steps to achieve the RRC status. So first, again, the board has supported unanimously a resolution to start this process. And where it is right now is Ross is going to get that baseline assessment. I agree with the way that Ross has characterized this. It's not a, do this or we don't get something or get hurt. It's just that then the next step is Groziel decides on whether or not to continue. So when Ross gets that baseline assessment, at least in my mind, that's when that would come before the Planning Commission first. You all will be able to get to review it, see if it's worth pursuing this or not. And if it's not, then we stop. It's that simple, I don't see any big issues. I hear you, Mr. Schweikart, on we'd want more people to talk to folks. For me, that's if we decide to move forward with the baseline assessment. Then we'd ask for more resources, more folks coming in and looking at different things. But if we decide that the baseline assessment that they give us is not compatible with our community or something we want to go down, and I do value the history and the experience here, I'll trust you all on that. Then I'll bring that to the board and say, hey, this RRC process is not the way we want to go ahead with. So that's where it is for me. And very important also is Ross is very rightly focused on resources for the township, but going forward with this gives a lot of resources to residents as well, businesses, et cetera. Before the pandemic, there's an MI grants thing where you can get matching funding for a business if you put a thing on there. I saw that. But when the pandemic happened, almost all the grants for businesses had to go through redevelopment ready communities, So I just want to, as you all are thinking about this, just think also about businesses and others on this island that could possibly benefit from state resources if we were to move ahead with this. So I know this is a planning thing, but obviously as a trustee, I've got to look at that too and how this could benefit residents in that way as well. So I just wanted to name that too,
Thank you, Kyle. Other thoughts? Jim, any thoughts? All set. Any other thoughts? Dan?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I don't think that anybody up here even hinted of being against this. I hope that whatever comments you heard, Ross, they weren't misconstrued as this board being against it. However, we do take this job behind these microphones pretty serious about what we do here and how we plan our community, right? Because we've been here a long time, and our families plan on being here for a long time as well. So I think this is something that's good, because free money is better than us paying for it. But you heard, a question, and that is, will we get so far down this and then find out that we won't have it funded in full, or we'll have funding pulled away because we didn't do something that was recommended to us? And I think that's a very fair and legitimate question, and if this commission didn't ask it, we'd be derelict in our duties. So I'm in favor of doing this. I trust you. Kyle has talked about this with the board. We need to do things that are a little bit different, which I've been advocating for a while here. So I'm in favor of this. Just wanted to make those comments. I think that you've not heard one person up here say they were not.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Final thoughts? Dan?
I feel we're at the beginning stages of looking at this information, also for master planning, and I'm looking forward to reviewing more information here in the future. I'm excited about the process.
Very good. Okay, Ross, any other comments that you'd like to share? Or?
Oh, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Good job for this, and good hunting on this.
All right, thanks.
Get after him.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I just want to tell Ross, since you're do double duties with the DDA, just want to thank you for whatever participation you had in creating the mural, out on Macomb Street. My neighbor was actually the one that did that.
Oh,
and
nice.
So it's just, it's pretty cool. And just, I think it's a welcome addition to the Macomb Street district, and keep up the good work on that.
You're here. Thank you. Okay, Brian, project update. Anything going?
Nothing new to report on. Obviously, we have 2 items you put forth to the board tonight, so we'll work with Kyle and we'll get those, as quickly as we can. We'll get those in front of the board so they can both move forward. I don't have anything else pending at this time.
And nothing has come back from West Shore.
Nothing.
Okay. All right, next meeting date. Brian, to be determined?
Yeah, as long as the commission's okay with that. I don't have anything that is pressing at this point in time. We are, where are we? We're October. I mean, we should probably, again, with some of the things going on, we should definitely plan on at least one more meeting this year. If not 2, if we get something in. So I guess just kind of keep your calendars open on the regular meeting dates, and as we get something, we'll reach out to everybody and we'll pick a date that works.
Okay, that works. So stay tuned is what it boils down to. Okay, if you would, Jim and Jay, let's meet briefly for a subcommittee discussion about our next steps. Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.